Welcome to Communication, Connection, Community, the Podcaster's Podcast. This podcast takes a deep dive into modern-day communication strategies in the podcasting space. We chat with interesting people who make the podcasting and speaking spaces exciting and vibrant. We also dive into the podcasting community with news, updates, latest trends and topics from this ever-evolving space. So strap in. It's going to be one amazing ride. Let's dive into today's episode. We have solutions, answers to questions, and ideas that can help you bring your podcast to the universe, but then also tips and tricks and solutions to really bring out the best version of yourself, because that's what a podcast is about, right? We've already established that a podcast, at least for business or from a business perspective, is a marketing tool. So we want to make sure that when we're doing that, when we're thinking of our podcast, that we're using it correctly. So that's why we wanted to put this podcast out there. And like I said in a previous episode, there are not a lot of podcasts about podcasting. There are podcasts about marketing. There are podcasts about speaking. There are podcasts about other mediums which allow you to market and promote your business. But there are not a lot out there about the skill or the art, if you can call it that, of podcasting. So that's where this podcast came from. So we're very glad that you're along for the journey. If you ever have a question, and I usually say this a couple of times in the show, but if you ever have a question, don't hesitate to reach out. You can drop us an email if you're ready for your podcast strategy call with me. We sit down for 30 minutes and we go through what it is that, your goals. What are your goals for podcasting? What are your goals for business? And how is a podcast going to help you fit into that space? We are in the middle of the 5 myths why people don't launch podcasts, and maybe some of these are resonating with you. So previously, we've talked about the money myth, the competition myth. These are in no particular order, by the way, but today we want to talk about the content myth. It's the reason why a lot of people don't create content in the first place. Whether it be social media content, whether it be written content for blogs or for emails, it's usually something along the lines of, I don't know what I want to write or talk about. Writing in the sense of emails and publications, books or articles, journals, things like that. But the content myth for a podcast is, what am I ever going to speak about? What am I going to speak about? And for that matter, and we talked about this last time a little bit, but a little bit of the fame and fortune piece filters through into the content myth too, because a lot of people say, well, I know people who are pretty famous, who are already talking about this stuff. Deepak Chopra talks about this, or Oprah Winfrey has talked about this, or Tony Robbins talks about this. So, if he's talking about it or they are talking about it, if I start talking about it, well, how am I going to be seen as the expert? So, plus, as I said, I don't know what I'm going to write or talk about, so therefore I'm not going to do a podcast. That is a lot to unbundle, but we're going to do it right now, because let me tell you something about content. If you've been in business for a year, actually, you know what? Let's scrub that. Let's say if you have been on this earth, let's say you're a fairly new and fairly young entrepreneur or business person. So let's say you are in your mid to late 20s. All right. Are you with me? And if you're older than that, by the way, you'll understand where I'm going with this too. If you are in your mid to late 20s, you have that much life experience to pull from as far as ideas, concepts, stories. And if we take it from a business perspective, because that's what this is about. If you are, a budding entrepreneur or a coach or a consultant, you probably have some credibility already. Even if you're just getting started, there is something that you have done previously that has allowed you to take this leap of faith to be a coach. Because being a coach, it's not simple. It's not easy at all. Being a consultant, same thing. A lot of people get out of their respective industries and say, I'm just going to be a consultant for my industry. It's not easy to make that transition. It's also not easy to make a transition altogether in careers that shifts you into being a subject matter expert in something completely different, such as real estate or finance, or, a lot of people go to school to become lawyers. So being in that expert space, it's never easy, right? But here's what you have. Here's what you have. Even if you are starting, you have some content. And by the way, the longer you've been around, so by the way, most of the people I work with, I work with, again, a lot of coaches, consultants, and subject matter experts, doctors, lawyers, financial experts, real estate agents. Most of those individuals who come to me already have at least 5, 6, 10, 15, 20, sometimes 30 plus years experience in their industry. Do you think a 25-year veteran in real estate or a 25-year coach that's taught marketing or business has some ideas about marketing and business? Well, of course, it stands to reason. So you have content. It's how are you positioning that content, or how have you positioned that content up to now to be seen as the go-to expert? Okay, that's number one. Number two, I will almost guarantee if you are a coach, if you are a consultant, or if you are a subject matter expert of some kind, you are already creating content. You're creating it for social media, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. Maybe even you're getting into Clubhouse. You are creating it maybe even for TikTok, or you're sending content to your email list on a regular basis. Maybe you already have even a video series. There is your content right there. When I started my podcast, Speaking of Speaking, I remember sitting down and thinking about this. This was probably one of the biggest issues I had, was where is my content going to come from? And I had to really take a step back and break it down simply, because when you break it down quite simply and you have one piece of content per blog, per podcast, per Facebook post, per LinkedIn post, whatever it is, when you have one subject area, one topic that you're going to cover in that 3 to 5 minute Facebook Live, for example, guess what? It becomes easier. We're talking about the 5 myths right now. I could have put all of those 5 myths into one episode and just said, here's the 5 myths, have at her. If you have questions, call me. I could have done that, but I didn't. I broke it down. I said, let's talk about the 5 myths one by one. Okay, so here's a great example of how to structure your content so that it's user-friendly for a podcast. Break it down. If you have a piece of content that you've created for a blog, well, a list of 10 things, guess what? That becomes 10 separate podcast episodes. Now, we're going to talk about the time myth a little later on, but some people say, well, won't those episodes then be too short if I'm only covering a little bit from that list in each one? Well, no, and we're going to cover that in more detail when we talk about the time myth, by the way, because time is something we have created, and we'll dive into that in another couple of episodes. But from a content creation perspective, one thought per episode, or one episode per thought. And you can break it down into subcategories like we've done in some of these episodes. We've broken them down. As a matter of fact, my episode 1 talked about some of the great benefits of why you should have a podcast. I could have done that over 5 episodes. And maybe if I went back, I could do that. I'm not going to do that, but I could. But that's the easiest way to think of your content is, can I break it down? Can I simplify it? And the answer is yes. The other thing to keep in mind is if you are already creating content for a blog, for a video series, Facebook Lives, LinkedIn posts, emails, you already have content. It's just a matter of restructuring it, reframing it, or curating it for a podcast audience. And that's one of the things that we do at Podcast Solutions Made Simple all the live long day is we help people reframe their content so they can now have it not only now ready for their email list and their blog or to complement their blog, but now it's ready for a podcast. All right. So there is tons of content within you already. If you've written a book, you have lots of content in that book. You have at least, I'm going to guess, 90 to 100 pages worth of content in a book, sometimes even more. So you have content. Let's help you restructure it into a podcast so you can then take that and elevate your credibility be seen as the go-to expert, create those touch points with your ideal audience so they can then decide for themselves if they're ready to do business with you. If you have a question, don't hesitate to reach out. If you are ready to book your 30-minute podcast strategy session, also reach out. If you like what we're sharing with you, I encourage you to leave a comment and leave us a rating too. That's what helps us to grow the audience and grow our fan base, but also it helps us take the information that we're sharing, bring it to the podcast universe, and also just makes it easier for you, the listener, to decide whether or not this is a viable thing for you and your business and your brand. The world is changing. It's becoming way more technical, way more tech savvy, way more digital than it's ever been. Let's help you get there and be seen in that light. We have 2 more myths still to come, the tech myth and the time myth, and I'm looking forward to sharing those with you in upcoming episodes. And thank you for joining us today. Special thanks to our producer and production lead, Dom Carrillo, our music guru, Nathan Simon, and the person who works the arms, all of our arms actually, my trusty assistant, Stephanie Gafour. If you like what you heard today, leave us a comment and a review, and be sure to share it with your friends. If you don't like what you heard, please share it with your enemies. Oh, and if you have a suggestion of someone who you think would make an amazing guest on the show, let us know about it. Drop us an email, askcarl@carlspeaks.ca. Don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter as well. You'll find all those links in the show notes. And if you're ready to take the plunge and join the over 3 million people who have said yes to podcasting, let's have a conversation. We'll show you the simplest way to get into the podcasting space because after all, we're podcast solutions made simple. We'll catch you next time.